So, when did you first decide to become a filmmaker? And did you go to film school, or how did this all happen?
I have been writing stories since I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I really enjoyed telling stories. And it was something that apparently I had a bit of a flair for at school, and my teachers all said, you know, he's going to go on and do great things story-wise. And then for years I stopped when I was kind of going through the difficult teenage years and so on and so forth. Then, especially as a trans person, all of that kind of stopped for years. As soon as I decided to transition, I thought that I wanted to write about it and tell a story. And so I wrote a fictional story of my own, not of my own transition, but using my own transition to depict the fictional trans man in the film's transition. So I shot it over 2 years. So at the beginning I looked very kind of fresh-faced, and then by the end of the film, 2 years later, I've got a big beard and, you know, looking completely different. And apparently that hadn't been done before. So that was my first film, XY. And XY did really well and was nominated for the Iris Prize and premiered at BFI Flair and stuff. And that was like the first thing I ever really wrote, produced, directed and starred in. And sort of spurred on by that, I carried on making movies. So that was what did it. Had that completely flopped and done nothing, I would probably have just done that as a kind of little fun thing to do. But as that was quite well received, I thought, you know, why not?
Yeah. And one of the themes that comes up, and which comes up quite often in your films, is violence against the LGBT community, specifically the trans community. Why do you feel the need to explore that so often in your films?
It's strange actually, because quite often that gets picked up on in the UK more so than it does in the US. I think maybe in the UK people feel over here that we've sort of moved on past that, but then when I hear very regularly from friends or see it on Facebook or see it, I think maybe more in the US, but you know, physical beatings and verbal abuse, and particularly for my trans female friends, is something that happens almost on a daily basis, certainly verbal attacks. In the US as well, you know, I see regularly from my Facebook friends young trans guys being beaten up at school or in college or in the street or in the library or in the restroom, or, you know, these are things that still happen very much on a daily basis. And I think whilst over here the narrative may have moved on past that, and it does tend to prompt UK programmers to say, you know, but this is very much a theme for you in your films, and my answer would be, I think, you know, this is something that does happen on a daily basis. I do hear of friends of mine walking through Soho hand in hand and getting spat on and shoved and roughed up because there are bigots everywhere. And I think, you know, whilst I tend not to make these attacks the focus of my films, they are certainly, it's a theme, I guess, that I go back to, because obviously it moves forward other choices and decisions and eventualities and consequences of these attacks in the protagonists' lives.
Yeah.
I think that child needs help.
You freak! We hate you! Disgusting! We hate you! Look at you! You're horrible! Disgrace! Tory! Tell me! Stop leaving!
Don't talk to people like that.
I was wondering, to what extent do you think you make films for the trans community or for the non-trans community in terms of education or in terms of representation?
I make films that I think are going to change people's perceptions. I make films that I hope people within the community will see themselves on screen, whereas possibly before they'd never seen themselves. And I think that's really important, because I grew up never seeing myself on screen, feeling incredibly isolated and lonely and like a sideshow freak, and like I was the only person in the world that felt like that. Because if you look to media and you look to the, you know, your little TV screen in the sort of 80s or 90s, and you don't ever see yourself on screen, media plays such an important part on, you know, with sort of changing the dialogue and opening people's minds up. And I think, you know, it's also through art, be it media or on stage, or, you know, on screen or on stage. And I never had that. So to me, it's important, A, to do that for within the community, but then I try to make the films accessible enough that a broader audience can watch them and hopefully have their perceptions changed. This is why I think, and obviously my girlfriend's trans, so I've got a great view into that side of things as well, and I've got loads and loads of trans female friends. I think until recently people almost didn't know that trans guys existed, because for us, by and large, it's so easy for us to kind of live that stealth lifestyle under the radar because of our physicality, and because, you know, testosterone is such a powerful hormone that it really does change you. No one would know you were trans. I mean, in my case, whenever I tell people I'm trans, they're like, don't be so ridiculous. Whereas with trans women, it tends to be that their physicality, again, having had hormones, you know, testosterone washing over them for usually up to sort of 20 years of their lives, it's very hard to reverse a lot of those changes. So historically, they have been at the front lines of most of our fights, most of our battles, most of our political lobbying and campaigning and so on and so forth. So, you know, for them, it's been something that they're used to, which is why I think there are more trans women's clubs and magazines and bars and so on, because, you know, they've had to be there. There's a reality and a physicality and a presence that can't be erased. Trans people have always been maligned, ridiculed, the source of derision and the source of, you know, humiliation. See Rebecca Root having, you know, 2 seasons on BBC Two in Boy Meets Girl was great, because for the first time, you know, this is the thing, is that whereas with gay people, if you look back to the genesis of the gay rights movement in 1980s San Francisco, Harvey Milk, when he was trying to get people on board, said, you know, look to your brother, your neighbour, your postman, your friend. You will see someone like me and you will see someone like us, and you will realise we are not to be feared. With trans people, unfortunately, there aren't enough of us out there to do that. I think it's only 8% of all Americans know someone trans. So when you're the unknown, people fear that because people are scared of what they don't understand. I think, you know, with more of us out there, with Rebecca being beamed into people's living rooms, you know, once a week for over 2 years, people felt that they knew Judy, I think her character was called, and sort of got to know someone trans. And obviously you've got Annie Wallace, who's another friend of mine, on Hollyoaks, who's doing great things, and obviously she's on TV 5 nights a week. And having walked through Manchester Pride with her a couple of years ago and seen the huge, overwhelming support and positivity, and people coming and go, oh Annie, oh my God, you're so great, we love you, and you know, I think to finally see that trans people are not just the figure of fun or the freak is hugely positive, and something that, you know, I think going back even sort of 6 or 7 years, people probably wouldn't have believed.
Oh no, that looks like the bank's number. I'm going to have to take this. Hello? Yes, Hannah Winterbourne. Yes, speaking. Yes, I know I don't sound like the Hannah you expected, but this is Hannah. Why can't you believe that? This is just exhausting. It's been a long day.
With the end of Headspace, and it says things are changing, was that a positive message in terms of here in the UK? Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, things are changing, and again, you know, because obviously having a trans girlfriend, I do see what it must be like for a trans woman walking around on her own. However, I know that things are getting better, and I know that 10 years ago I wouldn't have been visible and advocate as I am now, because I wouldn't have felt safe doing so. And, you know, much as I know that there are still things that do go on in schools daily, as you said, that I think now at least people are concerned that those things are going on, and that, you know, schools will, for the most part, tackle these issues. The Mermaids charity of which I'm patron, they work with kids from 3 till 19, and their families and their friends and their siblings. They help them, because obviously when someone transitions, it's not just you transitioning, it's your family as well, whether or not your family embraces that or not. But for most of the Mermaids kids, you know, the reason they're there is because their parents have taken them there for that support. So they are, by and large, embraced by their families. But, you know, it's very hard for an older sister or a younger sister to suddenly have a trans sibling. That leads to bullying for them as well. That leads to difficulties for them as well. You know, I think to have someone go into a school with you and say, you know, we are mermaids and this is so-and-so, and quite often, you know, if these kids are 6 years old, they're not going to stand up in assembly and come out. So, you know, mermaids will help them making little videos or showing videos they've made previously with some of their older kids, so that, you know, these kids realise that these are people to look up to and nothing to be feared and nothing to be... So there is a long way to go. Things are getting better, but yeah, I mean, I think across the world for LGBT people there is still a long climb.
You mentioned that you're working on a feature. Can you tell me a bit about it?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's kind of going to be an expansion on Dusk. You know, I knew as a total standalone from probably age 2.5 that I was different, that I was a boy. And I wanted to show that in this film, that this is a kid that has no influence from the media, from peers, from other trans people, from, you know, the big queer agenda trying to recruit, or all of these weird, you know, perceptions that people have of why a child is gay or why a child is trans. And I really wanted to show that this is someone left very much to their own devices that just knows who they are, because you do know. And I think, you know, given the freedom, because I've never written a feature, given the freedom to actually be able to have a scene that lasts maybe 4 or 5 minutes as opposed to, 30 seconds and move on, you know, would just be great. So we'll see anyway. So obviously there's the whole kind of funding and jumping through hoops and so on and so forth. But, you know, I think After 6, 7 short films, now is the time.
That's exciting.
Cool.
Cool.
Exciting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you. Awesome.
Is that right?
Yeah.